we started the conference with a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and we're going to conclude the conference with a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. And the 12-year-old is Adora Svitak. I said, I think it was yesterday, that Faith Popcorn had perhaps the perfect name for a trend spotter, but there's nothing more adorable than Adora. I'm looking at the headline of a story about her, and it says, "Is Adora Svitak the cleverest child in the world?" She types between 80 and 112 words a minute. She reads 2 to 3 books per day. She writes 330,000 words per year. Sees herself as an educator, poet, and humanitarian. Her family has now converted the basement of their home in Redmond, Washington, into a TV studio from which Adora gives daily video conferences. Earning $300 per 50-minute session, she's in big demand in the corporate world, where she can receive up to $10,000 per speaking engagement. When you watch her teach, it's impossible not to be impressed. She's very slick, but full of praise for her pupils, because she says, "When I was a kid, I needed encouragement." Hey, sweetheart.
Well, thanks a lot for revealing how much I get. I mean, now the IRS is so going to come after me. I mean, Billy, thanks a lot. Believe me, he did not pay that much. Well, and then the second thing is that I still think that I'm a kid. Obviously, he said he was using was, but I definitely still consider myself a kid, and in many ways, I really hope to speak for some of my peers, my friends, and other people who are my age. So today I want to start off with a little saying, "Let kids be kids." Raise your hand if you've heard of this saying before. I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. Good, it's good to know that I have earthlings in the audience. Well, to me, "let kids be kids" is just a little bit puzzling, because when you say that, do you mean let kids throw temper tantrums, play with Barbies, succumb to peer pressure, scream at their siblings? Or do you mean let kids participate in highly competitive competitions, share their opinions, participate in model UNs, form their own opinions? Too often, I think that "let kids be kids" is taken to mean forcing kids into an idealized mold of childhood, an ideal which many of us may not hold dear. Is that what you think it should mean? To me, "let kids be kids" is a saying in need of a rewrite. For starters, what does "let kids be kids" really mean in the first place? This Mother's Day, my older sister and I were feeling especially gallant and empowered with some pocket money, and so we took our mom out to see a movie at the theater. The movie was actually a documentary called Babies. Has anyone here seen that? I see some hands. Yeah, it's a really good movie. And one of the reasons it was quite interesting was because it followed the lives of these 4 babies from all around the world. 2 were from the developed world, San Francisco and Tokyo, and 2 were from the developing world, Africa and Mongolia. And so the baby from San Francisco, Hattie, had this very structured life. Her parents took her to baby yoga sessions. She was read books every day. Yeah, I know, baby yoga sessions, right? And then, I mean, but considering how we've benefited over these days from all the bending, stretching, dancing around, you know, probably good for babies, right? Anyway, so she led this structured life. On the other hand, there was a baby, Pani Zhao, who came from a country in Africa. I believe it was Namibia, but I'm not completely sure. And in any case, she was left pretty much to her own devices like dirt, mud, and the occasional stray bone on the ground. And both of them seemed like perfectly normal, perfectly happy babies. How can that be? They were both growing up in these 2 completely different worlds. And this brings me to another point. Babyhood and childhood really comes in many different colors, flavors, shapes, and sizes. And the ideal childhood is something which is very subjective and up for debate. It varies across cultural boundaries, too. I talked about San Francisco versus Africa. My mom ran an informal after school for many years at our house, and one time there were these 2 students, siblings from China, brother and sister, who came to study, and they were extraordinarily studious. I considered myself studious at the time, but they outshined even me. And my mom was like, "Why do you study so much?" And they said, "So that we can get a good job when we grow up." That was their idea of what childhood should be, studying really hard, working really hard, so that they could get their dream job when they grew up. And then there are the kids who take on jobs bigger than they are, like a brother and sister from South Africa I saw in World News, who were pretty much acting as surrogate parents for their younger siblings because their mother was sick. All of these different pictures of childhood only contribute to the questions and make it more confusing as to what childhood should really be. It's one of those things like the great American novel. No one can ever really pinpoint what is the ideal childhood, who should be doing the deciding. Most often, I see that it's adults who are doing the deciding. And it makes me ask, why should adults be the one doing the deciding in the first place? So here's what I think about the current meaning of let kids be kids and people's view of the ideal childhood overall. Don't place any responsibilities on them, let them have a completely stress-free life, just enjoy it while it's that way. And for the crowd that defines the saying that way, I have some news for you. A lack of responsibility doesn't necessarily equal a lack of stress. Maybe some of you have experienced that feeling where you're just walking around your house feeling bored, and it makes you feel a little stressed out sometimes. You're thinking, I should be doing something better. There's nothing that I'm really doing. I recently watched this documentary. As you can tell, I'm a voracious movie watcher. It was called Born Rich, and it chronicled the lives of these kids who were born into families with last names like Trump and Vanderbilt with millions of dollars to their name. They knew they would never have to work for their money. They knew their families would never have issues with money. And were they happy? No. They had problems of their own, problems like drinking and drug abuse and the whole range of problems that comes with having that knowledge that, no, I won't ever have to work or really do anything. And while I'm not advocating making your 4-year-old pay for the household utility bills, I do think, because it's a little hard to earn a wage at that age, I do think it's important to give kids some sense of responsibility, because responsibility truly gives you honor and pride. Responsibility is not a bad thing. It seems like another implied meaning of let kids be kids might be let them keep their innocence and protect them from the harsh side of the world and all of its problems. And this has, I suppose, its points. I mean, you don't want to tell kids like everything from the day they're born, but at the same time, much like lack of responsibility doesn't equal lack of stress, lack of knowledge about the world means less empowerment for us, because if knowledge is power, the knowledge about the world's pressing issues means the power to fight it. What's more, not telling us that the world has problems and saying what some of those are is kind of setting us up for a disappointment. We're going to be like, Mom, Dad, didn't realize the world is like this. You could have told us a little earlier. And that's what I would think anyway. Because if I had grown up thinking that the world was perfect, that I would always be happy and that everything could always go my way, I would expect for people to do exactly what I told them to do. I would be a little more spoiled than I am today. Believe me, my mom thinks I'm spoiled anyway, but it helps a little bit. And my parents didn't turn us into little misanthropes and tell us, you're heading toward doom and the world is going to end and that sucks for you. They were like, the world has problems. There are kids my age, your age, who are hungry and families like ours who are poor. But that's not all. The world has problems and you can do something about it. That's what knowledge is for. Knowledge is just not to sit in your head and collect like stamps in a stamp collection. It's for doing things. And because of our knowledge of global problems, I think that my sister and I are more empathetic human beings. We do our charity work. We do Trick or Treat for UNICEF every year. We work for many different charities. I raised $30,000 in Vietnam, actually, when I was there from sales of my book to go to schools that were flooded there and Save the Children Youth Ambassador. So I do a lot of work to try to help and make the world a better place. And I definitely wouldn't do this work if I just thought, oh, everything's perfect and fine and dandy. Oh, yes, thank you. That's the Trick or Treat for UNICEF that I like to do. So, and most recently, actually, I've begun working with the World Food Program. So I try to put this knowledge to use in fighting the world's problems. However, I will add this disclaimer. My parents may be regretting telling us all about global warming because now whenever they want to buy a new spiffy house, we're like, no, you've got to save the forest so that my future progeny will have a forest to enjoy. Not quite that phrasing, but somewhere along the lines. And when you shield children, you're really depriving us. You're depriving us of the chance, not only of the knowledge, but also the chance to make a difference, to fight those problems. And big action can really come from little people. Just look at the upcoming speakers for examples. For instance, 5-year-old Phoebe Russell of California, San Francisco actually, was driving with her parents. She saw a hungry homeless man and was wondering, what is that guy doing over there? And her parents explained that there were people out there who were hungry, a lot of homeless people, and that food banks often helped those who were hungry. And so Phoebe got this inspired idea. She thought, well, can refunds. Raise enough money from can refunds and we can feed people. So she raised enough money from those can refunds, getting cans from friends, family, even some total strangers, and she fed not one person, not two meals, not 10 meals. She fed 18,000 meals because of the money that she raised from those cans. Now, when I tell people that I go around and I teach and I speak and I publish books, a lot of adults look at me with this kind of look of concern on their face, and they ask, do you have friends? Do you go to sleepovers? And basically, some of them are a little more direct, and they ask, do you have a childhood? And to me, this is an interesting question, not only because I'm firstly enjoying what I do, I have a so-called regular life much of the time, and I learn a lot from my traveling, but also because from what I've seen, adults care more about childhood than we kids do. It's some sort of obsession with you guys. When I hear adults talk about childhood, it's with this longing and excitement. It's like a tropical island. And from the heated discussions I've seen online on some of my speeches, it's definitely a real flashpoint. It's an issue of hot debate. And I think that, this is my theory, it's my hypothesis, which I've yet to test, but I think that to adults going through the daily work, going to the office and everything, that childhood seems like a peaceful age, retirement minus the wrinkles and bladder issues and saving up for nest eggs. And I know that Moses does a lot of work with carp, so you have to, have an insight on this. But let me test out this hypothesis. Raise your hand if you would be interested in trying out your childhood for a couple of hours, a couple of days right now. See? I see a lot of raised hands. Right, I'm seeing raised hands. It looks like you guys have really enjoyed that. And another thing that I use to support my hypothesis, looking in your program book, compare the pictures that the speakers sent in to how they actually look. I have to say, I was impressed that Judy Collins actually still looked fairly close to her picture, not as far away as some of the people I've seen. But I'm not going to name anyone. I'm just saying that some people, you have white hair now. It's gray in there. Now, I'm not saying that childhood isn't important. Childhood is a very important part of your life. It gives you the chance to learn. It gives you the chance to explore. It gives you the chance to, test drive and really see what do I want to do and enjoy life. But honestly, I think that those are things that you should be able to do as adults. This shouldn't be exclusive to kids. And a lot of people also say, childhood only comes once. And I can think of a lot of other things that only come once. Let me think, turning 50, how about that? Does anyone say celebrate your 50th birthday, it only comes once, or 60 or 70? What about dying? Unless you're one of those people who have had one of those near-death experiences. I think that dying usually only comes once. And so, really, I see a lot of these stereotypes. Childhood is like heaven. It's like paradise, pretty much, with its tropical islandness. But childhood does not equal that tropical island unless you had a childhood like mine, in which case you get to eat lots of organic ice cream and fruits on your parents' dime. But I think that you can still do that as an adult. Like childhood itself, Let Kids Be Kids comes with its own unique package of stereotypes. Does anyone say let adults be adults? Let Kids Be Kids, which from now on I think I'll abbreviate to LKBK. I know that sounds like a paramilitary anarchist group or something from Burger King. But Let Kids Be Kids is kind of assuming, or at least this is how I've heard it used a lot, is that Let Kids Be Kids is kids running around, no responsibility, no stress, just totally dandy life. Well, if that's what Let Kids Be Kids means, or LKBK, then what would Let Adults be, I wonder? Would it be the polar opposite? Would it be a bunch of hopeless, tied down slaves to life, pegging away at the office, waiting for the weekend, gloriously being martyrs for the sake of their family to bring home the bacon or whatever. What is wrong with this picture of let adults be adults? Well, let me take a poll. How many of you think that applies to you? Raise your hand if you think that applies to you. I see one raised hand. I am so sorry, man. You need to get a new job, dude, okay? If that's how you feel. But what's wrong with let adults be adults is the same thing that is wrong with let kids be kids, stereotyping. And saying that all kids want to be free of responsibility and stress is like saying that all Canadians say about like a boot or love hockey. Actually, I'm not so sure. Maybe all Canadians do. Rather, we really don't want to stereotype, whether it's talking about kids, whether it's talking about adults, whether it's talking about Canadians and their particular likes as far as sports go. Another one of my least favorite things is hypocrisy, and unfortunately, I have a habit of picking pet peeves that everyone seems to have, including myself. In many ways, it seems that adults are hypocritical in the context of LKBK. One moment advocating, let them run free, let them do whatever, and then the next moment, Christina Summers, she was talking about this actually, it's circle of friends instead of tag, because you don't know, kids could get hurt and we could get sued. So when adults say let kids be kids, they also need to think, am I applying this across the board, or I'm just using this for an example to my own benefit? My mom was comparing let kids be kids to LBBB, which is of course let boys be boys, and there's an important difference, because when you say let boys be boys, or boys will be boys, whatever version, then that's kind of a license for do whatever you want, recklessness and freedom, but let kids be kids is a measure that fences in and fences out. It says, oh, sure, you can go play around the mud, dear, but you can't publish a book, goodness me, or write a blog or something like that, because that's just not a kid thing to do. Obviously, not every adult talks or thinks like that, but ignoring a kid's dreams, ignoring anyone's dreams for that matter, can be just as hurtful. When my mom held her own informal survey on Twitter and Facebook with her, quote, friends, to see what let kids be kids really means, she got some really interesting responses. Some had an enlightened view. They said it meant letting kids be creative and exploring and enjoying life, which I think is a perfectly valid view, but this was very interesting. One person said, let kids be kids is just parents' way of keeping kids from doing what they really want. And too often, I think that that is what happens. If making your dream a reality is something that comes too rarely, much like adults say childhood does itself, then I think that adults need to take into consideration, we often have just a couple of chances to make our dreams a reality. Our bodies are growing, so why wouldn't our minds? Why wouldn't our aspirations? Why wouldn't our dreams? Our dreams and what we hope to do aren't in suspended animation just because we're a little bit smaller than you. When the average kid says, I want to publish a book, or I want to start a business, the average adult might say something like, oh, that's great, you can do that when you're older. That's something that you can do, when you're after college and all of that. You may have noticed it's always what do you want to do when you grow up, not what do you want to do right now. The problem with this is that our dreams are not in suspended animation. One poem, A Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes, expresses this quite eloquently. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Does it fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? If you think that we can wait for pressing things like dreams and aspirations, then maybe we could wait for things like childhood activities. What are childhood activities anyway? Making mud, one of my favorite things to do. Why couldn't I do that as an adult? If society says, adults can't have fun and adults can't do what they want to do, then that's society's problem, not mine. And what's more, following my dreams, like publishing a book, does not prevent me from making mud, and I am living evidence of that. Come over to my house sometime and I'll show you. And Edna DeVore said something very interesting on this very topic. She said that explorers were like kids who had never grown up because they still had that wonder and that curiosity. And again, this is something that should not be just for kids. This should be something that every adult is able to have. Ultimately, some of our greatest examples of great ideas came from kids who weren't afraid to follow their dreams. Alex was 8 years old when she passed away from cancer, but before that, she was able to raise millions of dollars for pediatric cancer research from, guess what, a lemonade stand. Today, her foundation still works to do that. Here at this conference, we have some wonderful examples. Julianna Chen started training when she was quite young. Tavi Gevinson started her fashion blog at a young age, and her parents didn't apparently know a whole lot about that until she asked for permission to be in a very prestigious publication. So these stories tell us it's never too early to start thinking about what you want to do. What do I want to accomplish? How can I make the world a better place? I myself loved to write from the age of 4, and when I was 6, my mom bought me my own laptop computer. I started writing, and it really took off, and I wanted to get published. Instead of just scoffing at this heresy that a kid wanted to get published or saying, wait until you're older, my parents were really supportive, so I sent off my manuscript to all these different publishers, and I obviously got rejected a lot, and then finally when someone did publish my books, Flying Fingers and Dancing Fingers, you see them over here, then I started keynoting the thousands of educators. I would speak at conferences, and finally I'm able to speak here to you today. It's a great privilege that I've been able to do this, because if the organizers of some of these conferences, if people like Moses had taken Let Kids Be Kids at face value, then I wouldn't be standing on these stages, because they're stages made for adults. Many other examples of kids who have done great things. An Ontario native, Craig Kielberger, founded Free the Children. Jasmine Lawrence founded her own business. And his students at Environmental Charter High School work to make the world a greener place. The youth of my generation are an intelligent, empathetic bunch with our finger on the pulse of the world, and LKBK needs to change to encompass that in its definition. Indeed, it seems like each couple of centuries has its own attitude towards kids. In the 17th, 16th centuries, it was miniature adults. That's a pretty grotesque little image. In Victorian times, yeah, I'm glad I don't look like that. In Victorian times, it was children should be seen and not heard. And then more recently, it's been let kids be kids. We've advanced a lot since Victorian times, and likewise, our attitudes toward women and people of color have changed over time. The way we treat and view kids throughout our history provides a new lens through which to look at the development of our culture and of our society and of our world. Nelson Mandela once said, Nelson Mandela once said, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than in the way it treats its children. If Let Kids Be Kids is a motto for how we treat our children, then what does this tell us about our society? When we judge a society, we have to look at things like how kids' dreams are fulfilled and whether they have the resources available to fulfill those dreams. Do they have access to basic needs? How their aspirations are encouraged? And we must create this world because it doesn't exist right now. We must create a world where kids are truly free to be who they are, and LKBK needs a rewrite for our times. Like all of our previous attitudes toward children, it's said by a bunch of adults, meaning then that it's not our idea of who we should be, it's your idea. And that's something that I think we should change. Rewriting the definition of Let Kids Be Kids is no longer just an issue concerning me personally, but one that concerns the entire world, tomorrow's problems, and how we're going to solve them. So you know what? When it comes down to it, I agree with Let Kids Be Kids. That is, let us be everything that we can be, because encouraging us to follow our dreams is engendering the progress of humanity. Thank you.
Oh, before, Adora, I do think you're being a little tough. A little tough on the people in this audience.
I know, you guys are an enlightened group. I am expecting you guys to spread this message, I'm hoping, with all of your less enlightened, well, no, actually, you guys hang out with enlightened people, I know that, so.
What I was going to say is that I have the conviction that some adults have as much fun in adultery as kids have in childhood.